When HMS Ark Royal slipped out of the Clyde in late 1941, she represented Britain's growing mastery of a new kind of warfare at sea, carrier warfare. But months earlier, in the spring of 1941, this same ship had already helped decide the fate of the Atlantic. Her aircraft had brought down Germany's most feared battleship, the Bismarck. It was a turning point that changed how the Allies fought on the open ocean. The story of Ark Royal and Bismarck begins in the tense early months of 1941. Britain stood alone. German U-boats and surface raiders were strangling the lifeline across the Atlantic, targeting convoys that carried food, weapons, and fuel. To break that blockade, Germany had built two massive battleships, Bismarck and Tirpitz. Their purpose was simple: hunt and destroy Allied shipping, forcing Britain to its knees. Bismarck was a floating fortress. She displaced over 50,000 tons fully loaded, carried 8 15-inch guns, and was protected by armor thicker than anything afloat. She could outgun anything faster and outrun anything stronger. To the British Admiralty, she was the most dangerous ship ever built by Germany. In May 1941, Bismarck, under Captain Ernst Lindemann and Fleet Admiral Günther Lütjens, slipped from the Baltic into the North Atlantic, escorted by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. The operation was codenamed Rheinübung, Exercise Rhine. Their goal: reach the shipping lanes, sink merchant convoys, and vanish into the Atlantic fog before the Royal Navy could catch them. The British picked up their trail almost immediately. Reconnaissance aircraft sighted them leaving Norway, and British cruisers shadowed them through the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland. Admiral Tovey's home fleet was ordered to intercept. Among the pursuing ships were the battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and the new battleship Prince of Wales. At 05:52 on 24 May 1941, contact was made. The Battle of the Denmark Strait lasted barely 8 minutes. Hood fired first, her great guns thundering across the gray water. But within moments, a shell from Bismarck struck near her aft magazines. The explosion tore the ship apart. Within seconds, the mighty Hood broke in two and sank. Of her crew of 1,418, only 3 survived. For Britain, it was a national tragedy. The loss of Hood sent shockwaves through the country and the Navy alike. Prime Minister Churchill's order was brief and furious: sink the Bismarck. But Bismarck herself had not escaped unscathed. One of Prince of Wales's shells had ruptured her forward fuel tanks, forcing Lütjens to abandon the mission and head to occupied France for repairs. It was now a race: British forces closing in, German U-boats and Luftwaffe bases waiting to protect her once she neared France. For the next 48 hours, the Royal Navy threw nearly everything it had into the chase. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and long-range aircraft scoured the Atlantic. Yet Bismarck was elusive. In heavy seas, she managed to slip her pursuers. For a time, the British lost her entirely. Panic spread through the Admiralty's operations rooms. If Bismarck reached the Luftwaffe's protective umbrella, the chase would be over. It was then that Ark Royal entered the story. Commissioned in 1938, Ark Royal was Britain's most advanced carrier. She could launch more than 50 aircraft, Swordfish torpedo bombers, Squaw dive bombers, and Fulmar fighters. By May 1941, she was operating with Force H, based out of Gibraltar, under Admiral James Somerville. When Bismarck was spotted heading south toward the Bay of Biscay, Ark Royal and her escorting ships, the battlecruiser Renown and cruiser Sheffield, steamed north at full speed to intercept. On 26 May, a Catalina flying boat from the RAF finally located Bismarck, 700 miles west of Brest. The weather was foul, with squalls and heavy seas, but it was the first confirmed sighting in more than a day. Admiral Tovey ordered all nearby forces to converge. Ark Royal launched her Swordfish torpedo bombers to attack before darkness fell. The Swordfish were an anachronism. Fabric-covered, slow, and biplane in design, they looked like relics from the previous war. Yet their crews were among the bravest and most skilled aviators in the Royal Navy. Their task that evening was one of the most dangerous ever attempted: Attack a battleship bristling with guns, in a gale with torpedoes that had to strike precisely to cripple her steering. The first attack went disastrously wrong. The Swordfish mistook Sheffield for Bismarck, a tragic identification error. They released torpedoes, but by sheer luck, the weapon's fuses malfunctioned and exploded harmlessly in the water. No damage was done. It could have been a friendly fire disaster. But the crews quickly rearmed and prepared for another strike. As night fell on 26 May, Ark Royal's second wave took off, 15 Swordfish under Lieutenant Commander John Moffett. The sea was heaving, winds reached 50 knots, and rain slashed across the decks. Yet they flew, skimming just above the waves, radar guiding them toward the enemy's position. In the blackness, Bismarck's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Tracers lit the storm clouds like lightning. The biplanes pressed in at mast height. At 21:05, the first torpedo struck amidships. Another followed, hitting near the stern. One hit proved decisive. It jammed Bismarck's rudders at 12 degrees to port. The battleship could still move, but she could not steer. She began turning in slow, helpless circles. On Ark Royal, the air crews returned to the carrier, drenched, frostbitten, and half-deaf from the roar of engines and explosions. They did not yet know the full effect of their attack. But messages soon confirmed it. Bismarck was crippled. She could not escape. Through the night, destroyers shadowed her, darting in and out of gunfire, launching torpedoes, and keeping contact until daylight. At dawn on 27 May, Admiral Tovey's battleships, King George V and Rodney, closed in for the kill. At first light on 27 May 1941, the Atlantic was gray and wild. Waves crashed over the decks of Bismarck as she fought to maintain some control. Her engines still worked, but her rudders were locked, forcing her into a wide, helpless turn. She could no longer make for France. The proud battleship, once the symbol of German naval power, was now a wounded giant waiting for the end. At 8:47, the British battleships, Rodney and King George V, opened fire from 23,000 yards. Shells the size of small cars roared through the air. Bismarck replied, but her fire was erratic. Her gunners were exhausted, her systems damaged. Within minutes, the British shells found their mark. One by one, her turrets were destroyed, her superstructure torn apart. Her main guns fell silent. At 9:30, the British battleships closed the range to less than 3,000 yards, point blank for ships of that size. The pounding continued without mercy. Hundreds of shells struck home, ripping through decks and bulkheads. Fires broke out everywhere. The ship was listing heavily. Her crew continued to fight, loading anti-aircraft guns manually, firing until the end. At 10:20, torpedoes from the cruiser Dorsetshire delivered the final blows. Bismarck began to capsize, her massive hull rolling slowly over. At 10:40, she slipped beneath the waves, stern first, and disappeared. Out of over 2,200 men aboard, only 114 were pulled from the freezing Atlantic waters. The rest were lost. It was the end of Germany's greatest battleship, and a defining moment in the naval war of the Atlantic. For Britain, the destruction of Bismarck was not only revenge for the loss of Hood, it was a signal that the Royal Navy could still control the sea. But behind the headlines, one ship had made it possible: HMS Ark Royal. Her outdated biplanes had achieved what the combined gunfire of battleships and cruisers could not. They had crippled Bismarck beyond escape. The lessons were immediate and profound. The days of the battleship as the ultimate weapon were over. Air power, once considered secondary at sea, had proven decisive. A few torpedo bombers, launched from hundreds of miles away, had sealed the fate of a giant. In the months that followed, Ark Royal continued to serve in the Mediterranean, escorting convoys and striking at Axis shipping. Her aircraft fought off relentless attacks from German and Italian bombers. She became a symbol of resilience, the ship that had helped turn the tide. But fate had one more twist in store. On 13 November 1941, while returning from an operation near Gibraltar, Ark Royal was hit by a torpedo from the German submarine U-81. The explosion tore open her hull near the engine rooms. Despite desperate efforts to save her, flooding spread too quickly. Within hours, the ship began to list. Her crew was evacuated with remarkable order. Only one sailor was lost. At 6:19 the next morning, Ark Royal rolled over and sank. She went down slowly, gracefully, her white ensign still flying. Her loss was secure. The strike against Bismarck had shown the future of naval warfare. From then on, every major fleet would center around aircraft carriers, mobile airfields capable of projecting power across oceans. The battleship era was ending. The carrier age had begun. In Germany, the sinking of Bismarck also marked the end of Hitler's confidence in surface raiders. He ordered that large ships avoid risky operations. Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, would spend most of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords, hunted but rarely used. The Kriegsmarine turned increasingly to submarines, which would carry on the Battle of the Atlantic for years to come. For historians, the encounter between Ark Royal and Bismarck stands as one of the clearest demonstrations of technological and tactical change. It was not brute force that won the day, but adaptability, the ability to use new tools in new ways. The British understood that the ocean was no longer ruled by armor and guns alone, but by eyes in the sky and precision strikes from the air. Survivors from both sides later recalled the battle with a strange mixture of pride and grief. The British sailors respected Bismarck's crew for their courage. The Germans, in turn, spoke of their astonishment at the persistence of their pursuers. In the end, both sides had witnessed the transformation of naval warfare, an ending and a beginning, played out on the cold, gray Atlantic. Decades later, when explorers discovered the wreck of Bismarck lying upright on the seabed, they found her almost intact, her guns still facing the direction of her last battle. The rudders were still jammed hard to port, the very damage inflicted by Ark Royal's torpedo. It was silent proof of the event that sealed her fate. The story of HMS Ark Royal and Bismarck is more than a tale of ships and sailors. It is a story of evolution, of how war forced nations to rethink everything they knew about power, distance, and technology. It showed that courage alone was not enough. Survival depended on innovation. From the skies over the Atlantic, with canvas wings and open cockpits, a handful of men changed history. And in doing so, they changed the shape of war at sea forever.